Mary McLeod Bethune was a towering figure in American education and civil rights, who became one of the most influential African-American women of the 20th century. Mary Jane McLeod, educator, activist, and advisor to presidents, was born on July 10, 1875, near Maysville, South Carolina. She came from a family of former slaves who had gained their freedom only a decade before her birth. She had a commanding presence with her powerful voice and unwavering determination. Bethune's early years were marked by poverty and the harsh realities of the post-Reconstruction South. She attended a small mission school, becoming the only one of 17 children in her family to receive a formal education. Her education there shaped her understanding of the transformative power of learning, though her later career would test her optimism in ways she could never have imagined. After completing her elementary education at the mission school, Bethune won a scholarship to Scotia Seminary, a school for African-American girls in Concord, North Carolina. She graduated in 1894 and then attended the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, hoping to become a missionary to Africa. She was one of the few African-American students at the institute, and her time there exposed her to a broader world beyond the segregated South. However, when she applied for missionary positions in Africa, she was rejected because mission boards did not send African-American missionaries to Africa, preferring to send white missionaries instead. The rejection was devastating, but it redirected her life's work. She would become a missionary to her own people in the American South, bringing education and opportunity to those who had been denied both. Bethune began her career as a teacher at the Haynes Normal and Industrial Institute in Augusta, Georgia, where she worked under Lucy Craft Laney, a pioneering African-American educator. Laney became a mentor and role model, showing Bethune how education could uplift an entire community. Bethune then taught at the Kindell Institute in Sumter, South Carolina, where she met Albertus Bethune, whom she married in 1898. They had one son, Albert McLeod Bethune, born in 1899. The marriage was not particularly happy, and Albertus did not share Mary's ambition and drive. They eventually separated, though they never divorced, and Mary would raise their son largely on her own while pursuing her educational mission. In 1899, Bethune moved to Palatka, Florida to start a mission school. She taught there for 5 years, developing her skills as an educator and administrator. During this time, she became increasingly aware of the desperate need for educational opportunities for African-American girls. While there were some schools for African-American boys, girls were often neglected, expected to work as domestic servants with no hope of advancement. Bethune saw education as the key to breaking this cycle of poverty and limited opportunity. She began to dream of starting her own school, a place where African-American girls could receive both academic education and practical training that would prepare them for better lives. In 1904, Bethune moved to Daytona Beach, Florida, a town that was experiencing rapid growth due to the construction of the Florida East Coast Railway. Daytona Beach had a large African-American population, mostly workers on the railroad and in the hotels that served wealthy white tourists. These workers had children who needed education, but there were few schools available for them. Bethune saw an opportunity. With only $1.50 in her pocket, she decided to start a school for African-American girls. It was an audacious plan bordering on foolishness, but Bethune had absolute faith in her mission. On October 3, 1904, the Daytona Normal and Industrial Institute for Negro Girls opened its doors. The school consisted of a small rented cottage with 5 students, all girls between the ages of 8 and 12. Bethune served as teacher, principal, and janitor. She had almost no money, no equipment, and no supplies. She made benches from crates that she found in the trash. She made ink from elderberry juice. She used charred wood for pencils. She begged for donations from tourists and local businessmen. She baked sweet potato pies and sold them to raise money. She took in laundry. She did whatever was necessary to keep the school running. Despite the poverty and hardship, the school grew. Parents saw that Bethune was providing their daughters with real education and genuine care. Within 2 years, the school had more than 30 students. Bethune purchased land for a permanent campus, raising the money through tireless fundraising efforts. She approached wealthy white tourists in Daytona Beach, particularly the industrialists and businessmen who came to Florida for winter vacations. She impressed them with her dignity, her eloquence, and her absolute commitment to her cause. One of her early supporters was James Gamble of the Procter & Gamble Company, who became a major benefactor and served on the school's board of trustees. Bethune's fundraising ability was remarkable. She could appeal to people's better instincts, making them see that supporting her school was both a moral duty and a practical investment in community stability. She never begged or appeared desperate. Instead, she presented her work as an opportunity for donors to participate in something important and historic. She cultivated relationships with wealthy white philanthropists while maintaining her dignity and never compromising her principles. She understood that in the segregated South, African Americans needed white allies to achieve their goals, but she never allowed those allies to control her vision or dictate her methods. The school continued to expand throughout the 1910s and 1920s. Bethune added a high school program and then a junior college program. She purchased more land and constructed more buildings. She hired additional teachers. The curriculum combined academic subjects with practical training in skills like cooking, sewing, and nursing. Bethune believed that African American girls needed both intellectual development and practical skills that would enable them to support themselves and their families. She also emphasized character development, teaching her students dignity, self-respect, and race pride. She wanted them to understand that they were not inferior to anyone, despite what the segregated society around them proclaimed. In 1923, Bethune's school merged with the Cookman Institute, a school for African American boys in Jacksonville, Florida. The new institution was called Bethune-Cookman College, and Bethune served as its president. The merger strengthened the institution financially and academically, and it allowed Bethune to expand her vision. The college became co-educational, serving both young men and young women. It offered a full college curriculum leading to bachelor's degrees. It became one of the leading African American colleges in the South, known for its high academic standards and its commitment to racial uplift. As president of Bethune-Cookman College, Bethune became a nationally recognized figure in African American education. She served as president of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs from 1924 to 1928, leading an organization that represented thousands of African American women working for social reform. She was a powerful speaker who could move audiences with a combination of moral fervor and practical wisdom. She spoke at conferences and conventions throughout the country, always advocating for education as the key to racial progress. She became friends with Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was governor of New York and would later become president. Bethune's philosophy of education was rooted in her own experience. She believed that education was not just about acquiring knowledge, but about developing character and building community. She taught her students that they had a responsibility to use their education to serve others, to lift up their race, and to fight for justice. She emphasized self-reliance and economic independence, teaching that African Americans needed to build their own institutions and businesses rather than depending on white philanthropy or government assistance. Yet she also recognized the need for interracial cooperation and worked to build bridges between the races, even while fighting against segregation and discrimination. When Franklin Roosevelt was elected president in 1932, Bethune saw an opportunity to influence national policy. She cultivated her friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt, who shared her commitment to racial justice and social reform. Through Eleanor, Bethune gained access to the president and other administration officials. In 1935, she was appointed to the National Youth Administration as director of the Division of Negro Affairs. It was the highest position an African American woman had ever held in the federal government. Bethune used the position to ensure that African American young people received their fair share of NYA programs and benefits. As Director of Negro Affairs for the NYA, Bethune worked to provide job training, employment, and educational opportunities for African American youth during the Great Depression. She traveled throughout the country, visiting NYA projects and advocating for equal treatment. She fought against discrimination within the NYA and other New Deal agencies. She insisted that African Americans be hired for administrative positions, not just as laborers. She demanded that African American youth receive the same wages as white youth for the same work. She was not always successful, and she had to compromise and accept less than she wanted, but she never stopped fighting for justice. Bethune also organized the Federal Council on Negro Affairs, an informal group of African American officials in the Roosevelt administration. The group, which became known as the Black Cabinet, met regularly to discuss issues affecting African Americans and to coordinate their efforts to influence government policy. The Black Cabinet had no official status, but it gave African Americans a collective voice in the federal government for the first time. Bethune was the leader of the group, using her position and her relationships to advance the cause of racial justice. During World War II, Bethune worked to ensure that African Americans could participate fully in the war effort. She advocated for the integration of the armed forces, though this would not be achieved until after the war. She worked to ensure that African American women could serve in the Women's Army Corps and other military organizations. She fought against discrimination in defense industries, supporting efforts to require companies with government contracts to hire African Americans. She saw the war as an opportunity to advance civil rights, arguing that a nation fighting for democracy abroad should practice democracy at home. Bethune's influence during the Roosevelt years was unprecedented for an African American woman. She had regular access to the President and First Lady. She spoke at national conferences and was quoted in newspapers. She advised government officials on race relations. She represented African American interests in the highest councils of government, yet her influence had limits. The Roosevelt administration, dependent on Southern Democratic support in Congress, was unwilling to challenge segregation directly. Bethune had to work within a system that was fundamentally unjust, trying to achieve incremental progress while the larger structure of racial oppression remained intact. After Roosevelt's death in 1945, Bethune's influence in Washington declined. The Truman administration was less receptive to her advice, and the conservative political climate of the late 1940s was hostile to civil rights activism. Bethune returned to Florida and to Bethune-Cookman College, though she remained active in national affairs. She served as a consultant to the United States delegation at the founding conference of the United Nations in San Francisco in 1945. She was the only African-American woman in the official delegation, and she worked to ensure that the UN Charter included strong language on human rights and racial equality. In 1949, Bethune went to Haiti as part of a presidential delegation to the inauguration of President Dumarsai's Estimé. It was a triumphant moment for her, as she was honored as a distinguished visitor and treated with the respect that was denied her in her own country. The trip to Haiti, where African descendants governed themselves and held positions of authority, reinforced her belief that racial oppression was not natural or inevitable, but was a product of specific historical circumstances that could be changed. Bethune retired as president of Bethune-Cookman College in 1942, though she remained active as a trustee and advisor. She had led the institution for nearly 40 years, transforming it from a small school in a rented cottage to a fully accredited four-year college with hundreds of students and a campus worth millions of dollars. Her achievement was remarkable, especially considering that she had started with nothing but faith and determination. The college was her greatest legacy, a living monument to her vision and her persistence. In her later years, Bethune focused on writing and speaking about her life and her philosophy. She wrote her autobiography, though it was never completed or published during her lifetime. She wrote articles for newspapers and magazines, always advocating for education and racial justice. She continued to speak at conferences and conventions, though her health was declining. She suffered from asthma and heart disease, conditions that limited her energy but never diminished her commitment to her cause. Bethune also worked to preserve her papers and documents, understanding that her life had historical significance. She donated her personal papers to the Amistad Research Center, ensuring that future generations would be able to study her work and learn from her example. She was conscious of her place in history and wanted to ensure that the story of African American women's contributions to education and civil rights would not be forgotten. On May 18, 1955, Mary McLeod Bethune died of a heart attack at her home in Daytona Beach, Florida. She was 79 years old. Her funeral was held at Bethune-Cookman College, and thousands attended to pay their respects. Tributes poured in from across the country, from presidents and politicians, from educators and civil rights leaders, from former students and colleagues. She was buried on the campus of Bethune-Cookman College, the institution she had founded and nurtured for half a century. Bethune's legacy is profound and enduring. She was an educator who believed that knowledge was power and that education could transform individuals and communities. She was a civil rights activist who fought for justice and equality at a time when such advocacy was dangerous and difficult. She was a political leader who opened doors for African Americans in government and demonstrated that African American women could exercise influence at the highest levels of power. She was an institution builder who created a college that continues to educate students today, more than a century after she opened her small school in a rented cottage. Bethune's philosophy emphasized self-help and racial solidarity. She believed that African Americans needed to build their own institutions and support their own businesses. She taught that education and economic independence were the keys to racial progress. She insisted that African Americans should take pride in their heritage and their achievements, refusing to accept the racist stereotypes that pervaded American society. Yet she also believed in interracial cooperation and worked with white allies to achieve her goals. She understood that African Americans could not overcome racial oppression alone, but needed to build coalitions and find common ground with others who shared their commitment to justice. Modern historians have recognized Bethune as one of the most important African American leaders of the 20th century. They acknowledge her pioneering role in education, her groundbreaking work in government, and her tireless advocacy for civil rights. They understand that she operated in a time of severe racial oppression and that her achievements were all the more remarkable given the obstacles she faced. They recognize that she was not just a leader for African Americans, but a leader for all Americans, someone who embodied the best values of democracy and equality. Yet Bethune's legacy also includes contradictions and limitations. Her emphasis on self-help and personal responsibility sometimes seemed to blame African Americans for their own oppression, suggesting that if they just worked harder and behaved better, they would overcome racism. Her willingness to compromise with white power structures sometimes meant accepting less than full equality. Her focus on education as the solution to racial problems underestimated the depth of white resistance to racial justice. She believed that if African Americans proved themselves worthy through education and achievement, white Americans would accept them as equals. History has shown that racism is not primarily a problem of ignorance or misunderstanding, but a system of power that protects white privilege and must be confronted and dismantled, not just educated away. Bethune also operated within a framework of respectability politics, teaching her students to dress properly, speak correctly, and behave in ways that would win white approval. This approach was practical given the realities of the segregated South, where African Americans who challenged white expectations risked violence and economic retaliation. Yet it also placed the burden of change on African Americans rather than on the white society that oppressed them. It suggested that racial discrimination was somehow the fault of African Americans rather than the fault of white racists. Despite these limitations, Bethune's achievements remain impressive. She built an institution from nothing, educating thousands of students who went on to become teachers, nurses, social workers, and leaders in their communities. She opened doors for African Americans in government, demonstrating that they could serve effectively at the highest levels. She fought for justice and equality throughout her life, never giving up despite countless setbacks and disappointments. She lived with dignity and purpose, refusing to be diminished by the racism that surrounded her. Perhaps the most fitting assessment of Mary McLeod Bethune is that she was a great woman who achieved greatness within the constraints of her time. She had extraordinary talents as an educator, organizer, and leader. She championed important causes and influenced American society profoundly. She was determined, visionary, and personally committed to uplifting her race in an age of brutal racial oppression. She won significant victories, achieved her major goal of building a lasting educational institution, and earned recognition as one of the most important African American leaders of her era. Her life stands as a testament to what can be achieved through faith, determination, and unwavering commitment to a cause larger than oneself. Bethune represents a particular type of American leader, the educator-activist who believes that knowledge and character development can overcome injustice and create a better society. History has shown that such faith is sometimes naive, that education alone cannot dismantle systems of oppression, and that more confrontational approaches are sometimes necessary. Yet Bethune's approach was suited to her time and circumstances, and she achieved remarkable results working within the constraints she faced. Her tragedy, if she had one, was not that she lacked ability or principle, but that she believed too strongly in the power of education to overcome deeply entrenched racism. In the end, Mary McLeod Bethune was neither a saint nor a simple accommodationist, but rather a complex leader who navigated the treacherous waters of racial oppression with skill and determination. Her legacy includes both an institution that continues to educate students and a model of leadership that inspired generations of African American women. She is remembered today for founding Bethune-Cookman College, for her service in the Roosevelt administration, for her leadership of African American women's organizations, and for her unwavering commitment to education and racial justice. This is perhaps inadequate recognition for a woman who overcame poverty, racism, and sexism to become one of the most influential Americans of her time. But history often fails to fully appreciate those who work quietly and persistently for change rather than those who seek glory and fame. Bethune worked for her people and her cause, not for personal recognition, and her true monument is the thousands of lives she touched and the institution she built that continues her work today.